On the evening of October 21, 1978, a 20-year-old pilot disappeared over Bass Strait. His name was Frederick Valentich. He had taken off from Melbourne Airport in Victoria, Australia, on a planned flight to King Island. There was nothing particularly unusual about the journey, until Valentich contacted Melbourne Flight Service and reported that another aircraft was flying above him. The controller checked. There was no known aircraft in the area. Valentich continued describing what he could see. He said the object appeared to be large, metallic, and illuminated by bright lights. He reported that it was moving around him, at times appearing to hover and at other moments passing overhead. Then the conversation became difficult to explain. Valentich said the object was not an aircraft. Seconds later, the transmission ended. He was never seen again. And what makes this case so enduring is not simply the possibility that Valentich encountered something unusual. It is that we still have the final conversation. We know what he told the controller. We know approximately where he was. We know when the communication stopped. And yet the most important question remains unanswered. What happened to Frederick Valentich? The first thing worth establishing is what we actually know. Valentich was 20 years old and a relatively inexperienced pilot. On the evening of October 21, 1978, he departed Melbourne Airport in a Cessna 182L light aircraft, intending to fly toward King Island. The route took him across Bass Strait. At approximately 7:06 in the evening, while flying at around 4,500 feet, Valentich contacted Melbourne Flight Service. He reported another aircraft. The controller asked him to identify it. Valentich couldn't. He described seeing something above him, apparently moving around his aircraft. The controller checked the information available to him and told Valentich that there was no known traffic in the area. That detail matters, because from this point forward, the entire mystery exists inside a conversation that was recorded. There is no need to reconstruct what Valentich might have said from memory decades later. We can examine the communication itself, and that communication becomes increasingly strange. Valentich reported that the object had what appeared to be 4 bright lights. He described a metallic surface. He said it was moving around him. At one point, he reported that it appeared to be hovering above him. The controller continued asking questions. Valentich attempted to describe the object and its movements. Then came one of the most important moments in the entire recording. He said, "It's not an aircraft." After that, there was an unexplained sound on the transmission. Then the communication ended. Valentich disappeared. The search began almost immediately. Authorities knew approximately where the aircraft had been when communication stopped. Search aircraft and vessels were deployed. But Bass Strait is enormous, and finding a small aircraft in open water is difficult even under favorable circumstances. The search continued for days. Nothing conclusive was found. No aircraft, no pilot, no definitive crash site. Eventually, the search was suspended. The disappearance therefore created 2 separate mysteries. The first was relatively straightforward: what happened to the aircraft? The second was more complicated. What exactly had Valentich been describing during those final minutes? Because if he had simply encountered another aircraft, there should have been a relatively ordinary explanation. But according to the flight service records, no known aircraft was reported in the area at the time. That does not automatically make the object extraterrestrial. It simply leaves an unidentified object in the account. And that distinction is important. Unidentified does not mean extraterrestrial. It means unidentified. The problem is that Valentich never had the opportunity to explain what he believed he was seeing. His final transmission became the last surviving piece of his story. There is another detail that makes the case particularly difficult. Valentich was not reporting something that remained stationary in the distance. He described movement. He said the object was approaching. He said it appeared to be above him. He described it as moving around his aircraft. And at one point he suggested that it might be intentionally following or accompanying him. The controller repeatedly tried to determine what kind of aircraft it could be, but Valentich couldn't provide an identification. Then the conversation suddenly became incomplete. There was no final explanation, no later transmission saying that he had identified the object, no communication announcing a mechanical failure, no message saying that he had changed course. The radio simply stopped. And that is where the historical record becomes frustrating, because there is a temptation to treat the last few seconds as if they contain an answer. They don't. They contain a mystery. One explanation is that Valentich became disoriented. This possibility has been discussed for decades. A pilot flying over water at night can experience serious difficulties judging altitude and orientation. The horizon may be difficult to distinguish. Lights can appear in unexpected positions, and a pilot can misinterpret what he is seeing. Australian authorities did not conclude that an extraterrestrial object had caused Valentich's disappearance. One proposed explanation was that he may have become spatially disoriented and mistakenly interpreted something ordinary as an unknown aircraft. There is another possibility. The object he described could have been an ordinary aircraft seen from an unusual angle. From a distance, lights can be deceptive. A moving aircraft can appear stationary. A stationary light can appear to move. And over open water, there are very few visual references available to help a pilot judge distance or direction. So it is entirely possible that Valentich was seeing something real but misunderstood what it was. That possibility has to remain on the table, but it doesn't answer everything. Because Valentich wasn't simply reporting a light. He repeatedly described an object, and he appeared convinced that what he was seeing was something other than a conventional aircraft. Then there is the most uncomfortable possibility that the object was genuinely unknown, not necessarily extraterrestrial, not necessarily advanced, simply something that could not be identified at the time. That possibility is actually much less dramatic than the UFO explanation, and yet it may be the most honest conclusion available, because there is a difference between saying, "We don't know what Valentich saw," and saying, "Valentich saw an alien spacecraft." The first statement is supported by the surviving record, the second is not, and this distinction matters because the disappearance itself cannot be used as proof of the UFO hypothesis. Valentich disappeared. His aircraft disappeared. His final radio transmission contains a description of something he couldn't identify. Those are the facts. Everything beyond that requires interpretation. But there is one part of the story that continues to draw attention. The object wasn't simply described as an indistinct light. Valentich gave a physical description. He mentioned a metallic appearance. He described bright lights. He described unusual movement, and he repeatedly tried to communicate that what he was seeing did not behave like a normal aircraft. Then his transmission ended with an unexplained sound. The recording has been examined and discussed repeatedly. Some have interpreted that final sound as evidence of something extraordinary. Others have argued that there is simply not enough information to determine what produced it. Again, the distinction is important. We have a recording. We do not have an explanation. And those are not the same thing. There is another question that deserves attention. If Valentich crashed into Bass Strait, why was the aircraft never conclusively recovered? The obvious answer is that water is difficult to search. The aircraft was small. The ocean is vast, and the disappearance occurred at night. Even when search operations begin quickly, recovery is not guaranteed. An aircraft entering the sea can leave very little visible evidence. Wreckage can drift, debris can sink. The location of the final transmission may not correspond precisely to the location of an impact, so the absence of wreckage is mysterious, but it is not impossible. This is where the story becomes difficult for both believers and skeptics. The evidence does not comfortably belong to either side. There is enough unusual information to make the case fascinating, but there is not enough evidence to establish the extraordinary explanation. And then there is Valentich himself. He was young. He was flying a light aircraft. He had a destination. He was communicating with flight services. He knew he was reporting something unusual, and he had no reason, based on the surviving evidence, to believe that this would be his final conversation. That makes the ending particularly unsettling. There was no dramatic declaration, no farewell, no warning that he knew he was about to disappear. Just a pilot trying to describe something he could not identify. Then silence. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed. Some involve conventional aircraft, Some involve atmospheric phenomena, some involve human error, some suggest that Valentich became disoriented. Others have interpreted the incident as evidence of extraterrestrial activity. There have even been reports of unidentified objects in the broader region around the time of the disappearance. But none of these theories has solved the central problem. There is no confirmed explanation for what happened to Valentich, and there is no confirmed identification of the object he reported. That leaves us with something unusual. Not proof, not disproof, an unresolved historical record. Perhaps the most important thing about the Valentich case is what it teaches us about missing information. When a person disappears, people naturally want an answer. If the answer isn't available, we begin constructing possibilities, and the more mysterious the circumstances become, the easier it is for speculation to fill the gaps. But gaps are not evidence of a particular explanation. They are simply gaps. In Valentich's case, we have a genuine disappearance, we have a genuine radio transmission, we have a genuine search operation, and we have a final report describing an unidentified object. What we don't have is the ending. We don't know whether Valentich misidentified another aircraft. We don't know whether he became disoriented. We don't know whether his aircraft suffered a mechanical problem, and we don't know what produced the object he described. Most importantly, we don't know where Frederick Valentich and his aircraft ultimately went. There is one final detail I keep coming back to. Not the theories, not the photographs that have circulated over the years, not the stories that grew around the case afterward. The conversation. Because for a few minutes, someone was there. A pilot was flying across Bass Strait. He saw something. He tried to explain it. Someone on the other end of the radio was listening. Questions were asked, answers were given, and then the conversation stopped. That is all we have. A voice, a disappearance, and a question that has survived for nearly half a century. What did Frederick Valentich actually see that night? Maybe it was an aircraft he could not identify. Maybe it was a natural phenomenon. Maybe disorientation played a role. Or perhaps there was something else in the sky that no one has ever been able to explain. We don't know. And that is precisely why the case remains open in the public imagination, because sometimes the most disturbing mysteries aren't the ones with unbelievable answers. They're the ones where the evidence ends just before the answer begins. And on October 21st, 1978, somewhere over Bass Strait, that's exactly what happened. A voice disappeared from the radio, and Frederick Valentich disappeared with it.